used effectively within local government. And obviously, as a local authority leader himself, he's on the front line addressing the budget himself. I would say that in last year's spending review, we put money into supporting families, family hubs, Start for Life investment of £500 million, but he makes a very sensible point, and on Thursday he'll see how we're going to make that money work.
Dave McHillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local authority of Hackney has suffered cuts of nearly 50% over the last decade or so, but nevertheless delivers efficient and effective public services, and money given to good local authorities can be more cost-effective and better value for money for the taxpayer. So will he consider that as the Chancellor approaches Thursday?
Absolutely, I will. And of course, it's not just about what the actual cash settlement is, it's about the interaction with other pots of money that are being spent, particularly the health service. And that is something that is at the top of mind to myself and the Chancellor as we can concentrate on what to do on Thursday.
Toby Perkins.
The Government is committed to helping as many first-time buyers as possible onto the housing ladder. We're investing £11.5 billion to build more affordable homes that the country needs. First-time buyers can access first-time buyers relief for stamp duty land tax, and that means that 90% of first-time buyers need pay no stamp duty at all.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For so many younger people, even those on really good wages, the idea of owning their own house is just a pipe dream now. We have 1 million more people in private rented accommodation and 800,000 fewer households under 45 owning their own home since 2010. What is it about 12 years of a Conservative government that is so brutal for those young people who have ambitions to own their own home?
The Government is very conscious of the desire for people to own their own home and is very supportive of that. That's why we've made so many interventions in terms of affordability home. But underlying that, Mr. Speaker, is the strength of the economy that offers great employment prospects for those who seek to work hard, to save and ultimately to be able to purchase their own home. We're on their side.
The Minister Pack Natal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The consequences of the disastrous mini-budget in September continue to be felt, as we will see in the autumn statement on Thursday. The third budget statement in 2 months, from the fourth Chancellor since the summer, presided over by the fifth Prime Minister in 6 years. Whatever they represent, Mr. Speaker, it's certainly not stability. Now, when it comes to mortgages, rates are still well above what they were before the mini-budget. I have a constituent who's a first-time buyer. He's facing an increase of £200 a month in his mortgage quote compared to that before the mini-budget. Why should my constituent and thousands like him pay the price in their mortgage payments for the economic damage caused by the government's own recklessness?
Well, the honourable gentleman does this House and his constituents a great disservice with that characterisation which did not mention once, Mr. Speaker, the tragedy of the events caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fact that we're coming off the back of an extraordinary intervention to protect this country, to protect jobs, to protect businesses on the back of COVID. And I'd ask him in future, when he's characterising the economy, he owes it to all of us. He owes it to all of us to be more proportionate.
Mr. Speaker, I know that after 12 years they quite like stealing our ideas, like the windfall tax and the energy price freeze. So let me offer a suggestion today. High deposit demands, increased unaffordability due to price rises, and now rising mortgage rates all mean it is increasingly difficult for first-time buyers to get on the property ladder. So would the Government consider Labour's proposal for a mortgage guarantee scheme, as operates in some other countries like Canada and others, which would help first-time buyers get on the property ladder and protect them from negative equity in times of market turbulence? Wouldn't that be a practical idea to stop people being trapped in the private rented sector and help them buy a home of their own?
Mr. Speaker, not only is that a good idea, that is a Conservative idea that we've already introduced. So I'm glad that the honourable member belatedly has latched on to that.
Lip done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the subject of affordability of mortgage payments, with interest rates rising around the world, many other countries are looking at more imaginative ways at enabling those with mortgages to continue to pay. Would he look at some of the schemes operating in the United States which allow lenders to extend the duration of their mortgage to allow payments to remain at an even keel and therefore more affordable for hard-pressed householders?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll absolutely do that. The honourable gentleman is quite right to point to the fact that mortgage rates have been rising throughout the world. This government will always be on the side of trying to protect those with their mortgages. Lenders are responsible and are willing to extend, and the advice is always to speak to your lender if you have difficulty. I will certainly look at the case that the honourable member mentions.
Ben Everett.
Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to answer this question together with number 15. Inflation is the enemy of stability, and this government has acted decisively to bear down on inflation, including the energy price guarantee, which will take up to 5% off the headline rate.
Good morning. We go to Ben Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very grateful for the Chancellor's time last week to listen to feedback from businesses in Milton Keynes about the economic situation, the situation that they're in, as well as support for households and businesses and schools and councils. The main thing that came back through all those things that I managed to feed back to him last week was certainty, the need for certainty so that businesses can invest and forecast and plan. So will the package that he announces on Thursday contain a long enough time period so that businesses can actually put that planning and investment into our economy so that we can grow our way to prosperity?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Having run a business myself, I know that that certainty and stability is what gives you the confidence to invest. And I want to reassure him that what I talk about on Thursday will have our plan for growth over the next 5 years as well as our plan for stability. Both matter, but in the end, as we on this side of the House know, wealth is not created by governments, it's created by businesses.
And the Chancellor is group, so we'll bring in Laura Ferris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that my right honourable friend is working intensively to ensure that the United Kingdom can meet its current spending obligations, but can he confirm that the same prudence extends to our national debt? Throughout the summer, the Prime Minister said repeatedly we cannot allow debt to spiral, we cannot burden future generations with further debt. Does my right honourable friend share his commitment, and will he use his statement on Thursday to set out a pathway to debt reduction?
Well, my honourable friend will know that Margaret Thatcher said that there is nothing moral about spending money you do not have. And that is precisely because of what she says, that it passes on the burden to future generations to pay it back. Currently, our debt to GDP ratio is about 98%, and we are currently spending debt interest £22 billion more in the year to date than at the same time last year. That's more than the entire budget of the Home Office. So I absolutely agree with her.
Always. Stephen Ball-Hossrow.
Mr. Speaker, our growth rate in the 12 years since 2010 has been just 1.4%, lower than the OECD average, behind the USA, behind Canada and behind Germany. The public should have an answer to this. Why does the Chancellor think that is?
What the public know is that unemployment is the lowest for nearly half a century under a Conservative government.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Energy inflation and food inflation is already making the finances of schools and local authorities almost unsustainable. Many are in real fear of going bust over the next few months. Can I just urge the Chancellor, as he's thinking about Thursday, not to push this all down onto council tax, because many of the poorest areas in the country have the highest level of need and the fewest number of people who can afford to make additional contributions. So that would be entirely counterproductive, and the ratchet effect could actually make local authorities even more unsustainable.
I do hear what the right honourable gentleman says, and it is going to be a very difficult announcement on Thursday because we're going to be asking everyone to contribute more, but we'll be asking people who have more to contribute even more, and that will be reflected in our decisions on council tax and every other tax as well.
Save something for Thursday as well, Dr. Julie Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was encouraged by the Economic Secretary's answer to my Right Honourable friend from Ludlow about mortgages. I know the Chancellor believes that restoration of economic stability is essential for mortgages to come under control in the future, but will he confirm that he will bring in imaginative plans to protect people who took out mortgages in good faith and now find them unaffordable?
Good question. I can absolutely give my Right Honourable friend that confirmation, and indeed I intend to meet a group of lenders later on this month to discuss that very issue.
Gregory Campbell.
I think people understand the difficult choices faced by them and the Chancellor come Thursday, but will he ensure that the small and medium-sized enterprises across the United Kingdom that provide the backbone of our economy and employment opportunities are not forgotten come Thursday?
I can absolutely give him that undertaking, and I think that we have to remember that for those businesses, very often the most insidious taxes are the taxes they have to pay before making any kind of profit, because those are the taxes that can make you go under. And so we will think, as the Conservative Party, the party of small business, very hard about their needs.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, governments don't create wealth, says the Chancellor. Well, this government certainly doesn't, nor have any of its predecessors. Mr. Speaker, could the Chancellor tell us at what point in his predecessor's so-called plan for growth did he realise that it was a recipe for economic disaster? And if, like everyone on this side of the House, he realised that before his predecessor had sat down, why did it take him so long to speak up about it?
Well, I did actually reverse most of those measures within 3 days of becoming Chancellor, so I think amongst my many failings, the one thing you can't accuse me of doing is being slow to change things.
Kit Malthouse.
Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, the Chancellor is basing his fiscal strategy on OBR forecasts, but does he agree with me that the only thing we know for certain about those forecasts is that they're wrong?
Well, we know that all economic forecasts are inaccurate, but that doesn't mean it's better not to have a forecast than to have one. And in defence of the OBR, I would say that their forecasts are more accurate than the government forecasts that we used to use before them.
Jarvis.
Number 10. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government keeps the approved mileage allowance payment rate under review. As the rate is set using an average, it will be more appropriate for some drivers than for others. Employers, including public sector employers, can agree to reimburse a different amount that better reflects their employees' circumstances.
Dan Jarvis.
Mr. Speaker, petrol costs are up by a third since January, but mileage rates for key workers have now been frozen for a decade. So that means, for example, midwives attending home births, social workers safeguarding vulnerable children, and palliative nurses providing end-of-life care cannot afford, in many cases, the petrol they need to do their jobs. So, can I ask the Minister, will he look to increase the mileage allowance payment rates?
The honourable gentleman makes a very fair point. I think we're all conscious of the general increase in costs faced by key workers and all our workers. But I would just make this point about the specific AMAP rate. He will appreciate it is there ultimately as an administrative convenience for both employers and employees. The employer can choose to pay more, though of course they would have to check the tax impact with the employee. But I would just make this point. We do sympathise on the cost of fuel, but that's why, Mr. Speaker, we took that crucial measure in the spring statement to cut the rate of duty on petrol and diesel by 5p a litre for 12 months. That's worth £2.4 billion for everyone who uses an internal combustion engine, whether in the public or the private sector.
Andrew Slew.
I'm sure I'm not the only member to be concerned that as MPs we get considerably more than care workers doing domiciliary care visits. Can we try and even up so some of the lowest paid people in the public sector, get a decent allowance?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, actually. In my constituency capacity, I recently met with a domiciliary care company, and it's clear that obviously this cost is significant for them, the cost of running their vehicle. I just repeat the point that when it comes to the these approved mileage allowance payments, they're really there as an administrative convenience so that employers can support their staff, and they can pay more, but obviously there may be tax implications. But the crucial point is we've cut the tax on both petrol and diesel, and that tax cut was significant. I think only the second time in 20 years that we've cut both the main rates of petrol and diesel.
Anna.
13, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Energy Profits Levy was introduced from 26th of May in response to sharp increases in oil and gas prices and to help fund cost of living support for UK households. It is an additional 25% surcharge on UK oil and gas profits. The government has calculated it expects the levy to raise over £7 billion this financial year. All taxes are kept under review at all times.
Mr. Speaker, households and businesses are being crippled by energy, with support non-existent in the case of the Northern Ireland energy scheme. At the same time, Shell has reported quarterly profits of £8.2 billion and BP of over £7 billion, but Shell has not expected to pay any windfall taxes in this year under current rules. It's encouraging that there's word that government is intending to extend the scope of the windfall tax and not before time. There are undoubtedly difficult financial decisions to be taken, but this is not one of them. When even Shell is saying that this tax should be embraced, you know, the policy is in the wrong place. Will the Chancellor commit to increasing the levy scope and to closing loopholes on timing, share buybacks and in the investment allowances that allow tax to be avoided by diverting profit into polluting and unsustainable fuels?
Well, I am grateful to the Honourable. Just to be absolutely clear, the levy is an additional 25% surcharge on UK oil and gas profits on top of the existing 40% headline rate of tax, taking the combined rate of tax, Mr. Speaker, on those profits to 65%. And in terms of what it funds, she's absolutely right. It does contribute to the support, which will be going out in Northern Ireland. It will come in a month later, but be backdated to the 1st of October, and that includes businesses as well as households.
Stephen Kinnock.
14, sir.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to take this question together with question 21. We are committed to developing floating offshore wind to support our energy security and net zero ambitions. The Contracts for Difference scheme has already supported the first of its kind twin hub project off the coast of Cornwall, which will deliver enough energy to power 45,000 homes, sir. The floating offshore wind demonstration programme provided £31 million in grant funding to support many other new innovative projects.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Floating offshore wind has the potential to transform the economy and jobs market in my Aberavon constituency and across the South Wales area. But it's only going to happen if floating offshore wind substructures and other components are manufactured and assembled locally. There are two concerns on this. One is that the Crown Estates are putting in place leasing criteria which seem to be about going to the highest bidder rather than actually maximising local value and content. And the second is that there are rumours flying around that the government may be cancelling the FLOMIS programme, which is going to be fundamental in facilitating this whole thing. So will the Minister confirm that he will urge Crown Estates to maximise local content in the criteria, and will he also confirm the government is 100% committed to the FLOMIS programme?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. He is a staunch campaigner for the ability for his constituency to take advantage of this very exciting new technology, and I pay tribute to him for that. On the specific point about the Crown Estates, as he knows, it works independently to manage the seabed and has an important role in the deployment of floating offshore wind. Their approach for the 4 gigawatt leasing opportunity in the Celtic Sea is focused on ensuring the development of this new technology market in the UK as quickly as possible. But to be clear, and this cut straight to his point about content, the Crown Estates has announced that for the first time they are reforming the tender process to consider supply chain plans and sending a clear signal to the market that UK content is important.
Klaus.
Mr. Speaker, many renewable energy projects are limited by a lack of grid capacity. We have more wind farms ready for investment in the coming decade than the rest of the world, but the grid isn't really ready. For future offshore wind projects, who will be paying for the grid connections? Good question.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. This is an issue that has certainly captured the imagination in East Anglia, where she may be aware that there are certain proposals to bring forward improvements in the grid. This is obviously ultimately the responsibility of National Grid. What I would say to her is we do need to address the issue of the grid, but I hope she will agree with me that the country has already made enormous progress in increasing capacity from offshore wind. She may be aware in 2011 renewables made up just 9% of our electricity. That figure is now over 40%.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Floating offshore wind is emerging as a major new industry, both globally and for us in the UK in places like the Celtic Sea. The key question for us is how much of the real economic value of this new industry stays here in the UK. So to that end, could I really encourage my honourable friend to meet with ministers at Bays and also with the Crown Estate to ensure that the leasing rounds are properly structured, that the contract for difference process is aligned as well, and also other policy tools like the FLOMIS port funding and the free port policy hopefully coming to South Wales are all properly aligned to deliver British content.
Well, I repeat the point I made to the Honourable for Aberavon about content. I hope that addresses some of the concern he made, but I would be more than happy to meet with him first and then to feed back to other ministers and see what more we can do. But he's absolutely right. This is an extraordinarily positive opportunity, and if we seize it, it will deliver for parts of our country like his constituency.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BP Mona wind farm 20 miles off the coast of Anglesey will generate 1.5 gigawatt of electricity, over 1,500 construction jobs and £3.5 billion of investment in an area that is desperately in need of good quality jobs. Can the Minister urge his colleagues in the Senedd to invest in the Holyhead breakwater so BP Mona can move the project forward? And can he confirm that investment in Holyhead Port is the responsibility of the Welsh Government, not the UK Government?
I'm grateful for Monica. I cannot think of a colleague who champions energy investment in their constituency quite as much as my honourable friend. I can confirm the Port of Holyhead is a very important part of the wider transport and economic infrastructure of the UK. I know the Minister for Aviation and Maritime Sector has written to her and that they've specified quite clearly whose responsibility it is, and she's absolutely correct.
Shadow Minister Abena Apong-Osari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government allows offshore wind but is still banning onshore wind. Ending the ban would give us a vital tool to reach net zero, make Britain a clean energy superpower and open up new investment and growth opportunities. Keeping the onshore wind ban would make energy bills $16 billion higher between now and 2030. So why on earth are ministers undermining green growth and cheaper energy by maintaining this self-defeating ban on onshore wind?
Was the Honourable Lady for a question. The Government is committed to delivering cheaper, cleaner, more secure power. That is why we included onshore wind in the latest contracts for different auction round, which delivered a 50% technology cost reduction since 2015. The Government recognises the range of community views on onshore wind, and it is important that we strike the right balance between community interests and securing a clean green energy system for the future. That is why we have committed to consult on developing local partnerships for supportive communities in England who wish to host new onshore wind infrastructure.
We now go to Topicals Rishinara Ali.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be speaking for rather a long time on Thursday, so I will be brief today and just say that despite
agreement as well.
Mr. Speaker, may I start again and say, subject to your agreement on Thursday, I may be talking for rather a long time. So I'll be brief today and just say that despite the difficulty of the package I will be announcing, I sadly will not be drinking any whiskey as I do so.
Well, I thank the Chancellor for the work he's doing and congratulate him on the new post, and we hope that he lasts the week. Or maybe the full.
Or longer than the letters.
The government scandalously allowed organised criminals and fraudsters to take billions of public money through COVID loan fraud, as a result of the lack of proper checks. And there are some estimates that it's cost taxpayers £33 billion. Why should hard-working people pay for the Prime Minister's fraud failures from when he was Chancellor and the former Prime Minister's mini-budget fiasco for crashing the...
Order. Can I just say, these are topicals. We're meant to be brief. Chancellor.
I say to the Honourable Lady, of course there are lessons to be learnt about the way these schemes were administered, but I'm very proud that unemployment remains at a 50-year low because of the decisions the Prime Minister took on the furlough scheme and government-backed loans, and that was the right thing to do.
David Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly visit small businesses and entrepreneurs across my constituency of Bexley Heath and Crayford. They're the backbone of our economy locally. But like families, they've also been badly hit by the cost of living. Will my right honourable friend please reassure me that this government will do all they can to help small businesses across the country to thrive?
Well, that is what Conservatives are all about, so I'm happy to give him that assurance. And it's not just words, it's action. It's the halving of business rates for most retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, the freezing of the multiplier on business rates, the furlough scheme, the government-backed loans, the energy price support that we're giving them. All of that is because this government backs business.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's numbers show that real wages are down £1,000 a year. The Chancellor himself has admitted that the NHS is on the brink of collapse and is preparing for more stealth taxes on working people later this week. Getting our economy firing on all cylinders is essential for fixing this mess. So will the Chancellor tell the House where the UK is projected to finish in terms of OECD growth rates over the next 2 years?
Can I just say it's a pleasure to do my first questions with her, and I'll very happily tell her about the international situation. Inflation higher in Germany, the Netherlands, the Eurozone and Italy. Our growth forecasts are falling less than the forecasts in Germany. Interest rates since the pandemic have gone up less here than America, than Canada and New Zealand. Despite what some suggest, the recession has not been restricted to the UK, nor did it begin here. Not my words, but the words of Alistair Darling in 2010. If she wants to be the next Chancellor, she should listen to the last Labour Chancellor.
Well, it would be nice if the Chancellor tried to answer some of the questions. Out of 38 advanced OECD economies, the UK is forecast to finish last. That is 38th out of 38. Now, all industrialised economies have had to face COVID and the consequences of Russia's illegal war. Yet our country is trailing behind because of Conservative choices and Conservative failure. There is an alternative. So why doesn't the Chancellor match Labour's ambitions for British industries in hydrogen, insulation, carbon capture, solar, nuclear and wind power to create new jobs here in Britain?
Well, I think we're going to have many exchanges, and I just ask her, when she picks a statistic about next year's growth, not to do so too selectively, because when it comes to this year's growth, we actually have the fastest growth in the G7. When it comes to growth rate since 2010, we have the third highest in the G7. We also have the lowest unemployment for over 40 years. That is because with the Conservatives, we take the difficult decisions necessary to make our economy thrive.
Andrew Selou.
Have an energy crisis. Will the government allow onshore wind where communities want it, require built-in photovoltaics where they will work on new homes, and also allow solar farms on 3B land?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and further to the answer I gave previously, the government is serious about delivering cheaper, cleaner, more secure power, and that is why we included both onshore wind and solar in the latest contracts for different auction round, and will include them in future rounds, Mr. Speaker. The government recognises the range of community views on onshore wind and the need to prioritise our most productive farmland for food production. It is important that the government can strike the right balance between community interest, food security and securing a clean green energy system for the future. That's why the planning system is designed to take account of these issues.
SNP spokesperson Alison Poulos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Austerity is a damaging Tory political choice, responsible for 330,000 excess deaths, and a responsible, compassionate government would be exploring all options to avoid it. So will the Chancellor consider taxing share buybacks, as the US and Canada have already done? The IPPR and Commonwealth have pointed out that oil and gas, financial services and other companies have funnelled their mega profits into share buybacks. And would he agree with me that all of this is inexcusable when he wants to hike taxes on working people and slash public services?
Well, I think she'd better listen to what we say on Thursday before she jumps to conclusions. But what I would say to her is that we will approach this difficult situation we face progressively. We'll be asking those that have more to give more. But I would advise her not to talk down the financial services industries and energy industries that employ thousands of people in Scotland.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend will know, Putin's illegal war in Ukraine has driven up the prices of energy across the world. The government was therefore right to support households across the country. But can he tell the House what's the long-term plan it is to reduce our dependency on gas so that taxpayers don't have to subsidise energy bills?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to point to the challenge that over the last 2 years, nationally, we are spending £140 billion more on energy. That's almost supporting an entire second NHS. And we have to have a long-term solution, and that is about energy independence and energy efficiency.
Ben Lake. Speaker, the Chancellor will be aware of concerns regarding the adequacy of the £100 payment that has been proposed by the government to support off-grid households with the cost of their heating. But of equal concern is that we still await details of when and how it will be paid, as well as what support will be made available to off-grid businesses. When will the government be publishing this information?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Like him, I represent a rural constituency. I think probably the majority of households use heating oil. As he knows, the internal alternative fuel payment will ensure that all households who do not benefit through the energy price guarantee receive support for the cost of the fuel they use. In terms of timing, we are currently consulting with BEIS on the timing and delivery mechanism for the alternative fuels payment, and we have publicly committed to being delivered this winter, sir.
Jonathan Gullis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fairfield UK's latest survey of 70,000 motorists and hauliers shows they continue to be punished by cripplingly and needlessly high fuel taxation, which the Treasury has benefited from to the tune of £3 billion. That is why I'm backing the Sun and Fairfield UK campaign to at the very least keep the fuel duty cut. Does the Chancellor agree?
Well, my honourable friend, like the Sun newspaper, is an absolute champion of motorists in his constituency, hauliers and all those who rely on petrol and diesel vehicles for their well, they laugh opposite. But actually, my honourable friend, Mr. Speaker, is standing up for his constituents and doing the right thing. And of course, he's absolutely right to highlight the huge tax cut we put in place in the spring statement, worth £2.4 billion in terms of 5p off the duty rate on petrol and diesel for 12 months. Of course, I can't at the dispatch box make fiscal decisions, but we do keep these matters under review.
Earlier this year, Bradford submitted a levelling up bid, the only bid, Mr. Speaker, actually developed from the grassroots up by local community groups to build 3 new community-led health centres that will deliver transformational benefits for Bradford and to act to reversing the crippling health inequalities that we face. Ahead of the announcement on Thursday, does the Chancellor see that if he doesn't back grassroots community-led transformational projects like this, then it's clear that the government's levelling up agenda is truly dead?
The government is completely committed to levelling up. As he knows, there is a second round of bids for the second round of the Levelling Up Fund, and they will be announced in due course. But he's made a very effective representation on behalf of his constituents and local authority.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As chairman of the all-party group on personal banking and fairer finance, I've been in protracted correspondence with the FCA about the Blackmore Bond scandal. Despite receiving more than 30 complaints and a whistleblower producing evidence, the FCA refused to actually investigate. So will my honourable friend, I realise it predates his appointment, but will he investigate this and force the FCA to take action?
Thank my honourable friend for raising this case. It is a situation where, sadly, that was outside the FCA perimeter. It was outside the FCA perimeter. I'll be very happy to meet with him because I understand it raises important issues for him and his constituents.
David London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It isn't just individual mortgage payers who are impacted by increased borrowing costs. That's a particular problem for housing associations such as Parkhead Housing Association that I spoke with this morning. Previously, housing associations were able to borrow at fixed rates of 25 and 30 years. That has been reduced. Would the Chancellor be willing to meet with me to look at how we can pursue this with lenders to ensure that we don't stifle competition when it comes to building housing association properties?
It's an issue that we are looking at very carefully, and I'd be very happy for him to meet with one of my ministers.
Alexander Stafford.
I welcome the Chancellor's predecessor to Rother Valley in the summer to show him Dingston High Street and the money that was needed to upgrade it. He agreed to meet with me further about levelling up. Will he come to Rother Valley and Dingston High Street to see the levelling up fund money that we need with the bidders in, and will he look kindly at our bid and make sure the whole of Rother Valley is levelled up?
Well, I'm very aware of his outstanding bid, and I'd be very happy to come and visit him and discuss the needs of his community and all the work that he's done over the last couple of years to stand up for his constituents and secure the investment in his community.
Mr. Brendershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent registered with the regulated firm and invested in the financial product an FCA regulated broker recommended. My constituent and her father both lost money on the regulated and fraudulent product the broker recommended. Does the Minister agree that FCA should step in, support those victims of scams, and will he empower and instruct the FCA and other regulators to be more aggressive in their support of their defrauded?
Transformation program.
Thank you. I'll very happily meet with the honourable member to understand more details of the case. It is important that the FCA provide protection for consumers. That's one of the objectives of the Financial Services and Markets Bill that's currently going through Parliament.
Richards.
Speaker, Onside Youth Centre do an incredible job transforming people's lives, and I think young people in my constituency of West Bromwich East deserve that opportunity too. Will the Chancellor support my calls for the Levelling Up Fund to be spent on this important project in West Bromwich?
Well, I'm also very aware of the Honourable Lady's outstanding bid from her constituency. I can't reveal the outcome of the deliberations on that competitive process. But I will be looking very carefully at her bid and liaising with other ministers on the outcomes of that round.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, over 100,000 civil servants from the PCS union voted to take industrial action following attacks on their jobs. For the first time ever, the Royal College of Nursing have voted to strike over pay. Lecturers, health workers, teachers, postal and transport workers, all people who aim to support this country, are suffering because of the cost of living crisis and the former PM's 30 billion ideological rant. The autumn statement needs to show that working people are being listened to. Will it do this or just punish them?
I believe it will, because the cost of living crisis is top of our minds, and we recognise the very hard work that public servants do in a whole range of sectors, and of course with my own background in the health service as well. We have to tread a fine line though, because if we give inflation-busting pay awards to people who may deserve them and may be working extremely hard, that would just fuel further inflation. So we need to get the right long-term solution that brings down the root cause of people's anger, which is over-high inflation.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bedford to Cambridge section of East West Rail is rated unachievable by the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, a waste of taxpayers' money by the Business Secretary, and growth in the Oxcam Arc does not depend on it. So can my right honourable friend use the autumn statement finally to clear the uncertainty around this deeply flawed project?
Well, as the honourable gentleman knows, and I paid tribute before in the second reading of the infrastructure bill to his huge business experience and his time at the Treasury. But, Mr. Speaker, perhaps both of us should read the report that my honourable friend from Milton Keynes South referred to earlier, because, as he knows, we strongly support the growth potential of the Oxcam Arc. After all, it is a part of this country which is internationally competitive, and that's the sort of place we need to grow if we're to compete internationally.
Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government advice to sit in the shade is not enough to protect our skin. Sunscreen products need to be more affordable. Will he work with me and support my VAT burn campaign to save the NHS money, keep more cash in our constituents' pockets, and help protect our skin from both melanoma and non-melanoma cancers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The government received around £143 billion in the last financial year in value-added tax. That helps to pay for the services that we all care about, such as the National Health Service, and so there have been very, very strict restrictions placed on goods that can be exempted from VAT. But I do understand the Honourable Lady's concerns. I'm very happy to meet her to discuss what other forms of support we can provide, including, for example, commending Tesco's, who have taken the decision not to charge the VAT on their products.
Greg Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the noble Lord Berkeley in the other place has estimated scrapping HS2 would save the British taxpayer £147 billion. More pessimistic estimates have it at £100 billion saving. On a day of difficult decisions coming up on Thursday, surely scrapping HS2 is an easy decision.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He is consistent on this point, it's fair to say. And while we are always keen to hear about saving suggestions from colleagues, just to be clear, HS2 is a long-term investment which will bring our biggest cities closer together, boost productivity. It's currently supporting 29,000 jobs and will create 2,000 apprenticeships. Through better connecting the country, HS2 will open up new employment and leisure opportunities for millions of people.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor mentioned just now my good friend Lord Alistair Darling.
Can I mention another former Chancellor, that he should look at a recent speech made in Huddersfield by Sir John Major, whose analysis of what's happened to our economy since the Conservatives took over in 2010 is absolutely a masterclass in what has gone wrong and what has to put right. Will he read it and then think about it before Thursday?
Well, I always listen very carefully to anything that Sir John Major says, and I know that he took difficult decisions that puts the economy in excellent shape. The one thing I don't want to do is to bequeath it to a Labour government.
As the Chancellor prepares for his autumn statement, will he remember the good voters of Middle England, people who rarely, if ever, been on benefit, who've worked all their life for their mortgage and for their pension pot, and they fear that more and more of them are going to be dragged into higher rate taxpayers, their pension pot attacked, so that the state can get larger and larger and more spent on those on benefit?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I would just say to my right honourable friend that it is the good voters of Middle England who want us to be a country that pays its way, that doesn't borrow at the expense of future generations, and that can be trusted when it comes to sound money, and that's what we'll deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Skyrocketing inflation, much of it caused by calamities on the opposite benches, means the Scottish Government's annual budget is worth up to £900 million less than it was just a few weeks ago. When will the UK Government devolve more borrowing powers to Scotland so we can give the extra, desperately needed assistance to those struggling the most in our country?
Well, I spoke about such matters with John Swinney from my second conversation with him since appointment 3 weeks ago last evening. We discussed a range of matters, and I will always try and be as constructive as I can to find ways forward when the whole of the United Kingdom faces the inflationary scourge everywhere.
Given that we both agree on the need for a substantial increase in defence spending, does the Chancellor accept that any immediate necessary freeze on it should not prejudice the goal of 3% of GDP in the medium term?
Well, let me just say to my honourable friend that he and I both agree on the vital responsibility of any government to defend its shores and its peoples, and we are committed to doing what it takes to make sure we do that.
Final question, Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, in a letter to the Chancellor last week, Lord Deben, the chair of the Climate Change Committee, said clearly that demand reduction is now the biggest gap in UK energy policy. So will Thursday's autumn statement include an emergency investment of at least £3.6 billion over the course of this Parliament so we can finally roll out the long-awaited and very overdue home insulation programme that this country needs?
Well, Lord Deben speaks extremely wisely on environmental climate change issues, and we would always take what he says with the utmost seriousness.
Let's start with Christine Jardine, point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been revealed that in the Opposition Day debate on Scottish independence and the economy on Wednesday, the 2nd of November, figures used by Right Honourable and Honourable members for the SNP were in fact inaccurate. The Right Honourable member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber said that Scotland possesses 25% of the potential European offshore wind and tidal resource. This was then subsequently repeated by the Honourable Member for Inverclyde and the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire. Mr. Speaker, that figure has been debunked by the think tank These Islands and in fact by the Scottish Government's own civil servants. The think tank has shown that they're the product of a bogus analysis of a mixture of reports dating back to 1993, and freedom of information requests to the Scottish Government have shown that their civil servants have been privately warning against the use of these figures for at least 2 years. So given that these figures are completely fictitious, has Mr. Speaker had any representation from the members that they intend to come and correct the record?
Douglas Ross.
Order from the Honourable Lady from Edinburgh West. As she states, the figure of 25% used by the SNP is actually closer to 4%. And while they laugh and heckle at the research done by Sam Taylor of These Islands, they should remember what SNP Scottish Government officials have said. 2 years ago, they said we tend not to use this anymore. Also 2 years ago, the 25% estimate has never, to my knowledge, been properly sourced. And in January 2021, they said, yes, we did recycle those figures quite robotically without really checking them. Yet they are still being robotically recycled by SNP members, including the Right Honourable Member for Rothsky and Lochaber, the member for East Renfrewshire and the member for Inverclyde. So what representations have you had, Mr Speaker, from these members who just in the last fortnight have used deliberately misleading claims in this House? And if they did so knowingly, will they be asked to apologise?
Not I think to be more cautious on the language about misleading. I think I will now give my answer. Just a minute, please. Can I just say to you, Mr Covens, two of us not going to be on our feet at the same time. I'm stood. I've heard your attention. I will make my first answer before I come to you. Please, let's follow the orders of the House that are implied to everybody and include yourself. I thank the all members for giving notice of the point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of members' use of statistics. Members themselves must take responsibility for the accuracy of their contributions. The member has made their views clear, and I certainly don't want a continuation of the debate. Mr Cowan, I'm sure you're not going to continue the debate, are you?
Much, Mr Speaker, and I thank you for your forbearance on this matter. I've got no intention of rehearsing the debate all over, and all I would say was I've checked with Hansard, and I clearly said potential, and I stand by that. The Scottish Government and the industry had to invest into the UK Government that potential.
Order, but we're doing it again. You'll have to sit down. The answer to that is, thanks for that. It's a good clarification. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to continue the debate. A point of order. Sir Desmond Sway.
In an answer to my honourable friend, the member for Harrogate, the Chancellor promised a letter on arrangements to be made for Park Homes. Is there anything you can do, Mr Speaker, to ensure that we return to what used to be the normal practice, that when correspondence is referred to, it is placed in the library of the House? We all have skin in the game.
I've certainly ensured that you've put that on the record, and I'm sure everybody will have heard on the front bench, including the Treasury. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I apologise for not giving you notice of this, but reports suggest that protesters in Iran are being sentenced to death, and executions may take place almost immediately. I wonder if you've had any notice from any minister to come and give a statement to the House on what protection and assistance is going to be provided for people in Iran, particularly UK citizens.
Could I just say, I do thank for that very important point of order. What I would say is nobody's come forward with a statement. I'm surprised the Foreign Office haven't been knocking at my door to say they want to make a statement. I'm sure it will have been heard, and I've no doubt I would recognise the UQ might be presented tomorrow. Point of order, Sir Tony.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the coroner recorded this morning that the death of 2-year-old Al Bishak was caused by acute edema, in other words, a respiratory failure, but caused by exposure to mould growth in the home in which he lived, which was both prolonged and clearly severe. In that context, Mr Speaker, this issue of mould growth in properties, both private, social housing, etc., is a real one across these islands of ours. Can I ask whether any minister has given any indication that they will be coming to make some kind of comment on the results of this inquest, either today or in the future? Or if not, could we at least alert the Treasury bench to the coroner's conclusions? Because these have implications that go way beyond this tragic case of the 2-year-old boy in my constituency.
It is a tragic case, and I totally agree, and I thank the Honourable Member for giving notice of his point of order. I have not heard of any statements. However, ministers will have heard the points he's raised. I hope they will consider those points. And I know the Honourable Member will pursue this, and maybe in a German debate, if he was to put his name in, he may well be successful. Right, let us move on to presentations of bills. Barry Sherman.
Motor Vehicle Test Diesel Particulate Filters Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 24th of March.
Oh, you're there. Friday, the 24th of March. Right, thank you. We now come to the next presentation of the bill. Christine Jardine.
Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests Appointment by Parliament Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, December 9th.
Friday, the December the 9th. Thank you. Right, we now come to the 10-minute rule motion. I call Liz Saville-Robert.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Mr Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to establish a commission to assess the differential impact of the tax system in the UK on different groups of people, to require that commission to make recommendations for reform of the tax system and for connected purposes. All proposals put forward by the Commission would have to be consistent with the aim of increasing enough revenue to maintain spending on public services at current levels in real terms as a minimum, and to support the delivery of policies aimed at reducing inequalities. This would be a joint endeavour, Mr Speaker, by all governments, the Welsh Government, the Scottish Government, the Northern Ireland Executive and the UK Government. So, why are we proposing a tax reform commission? 2 days from now, we'll be responding to the Chancellor's autumn statement, itself a sticking plaster over the previous Chancellor's fiasco of a financial statement in September. Running through these measures is likely to be the principle of temporary relief, but in no way are they likely to recognise the challenge of long-term changes in demographics, in climate and in geopolitics. There is a policy of denial from this government that the common good is indeed dependent on the public purse. We are not self-sufficient individuals throughout our lives. COVID should have taught us that. There is such a thing as society. The social contract requires actions to safeguard the common good that can only be provided by central government and which require central government to have sufficient funds to realise them. This government has spent 12 years unpicking that social contract. David Cameron preached austerity as though that were the only remedy to the 2008 financial crash. Austerity was and remains the Conservatives' value of choice, but austerity is an ideological decision. And it has resulted in the slow-motion collapse of those public functions that should act as a scaffold for the common good. The effects of austerity? 300,000 excess deaths, hollowed out zombie public services, the quilt of our social fabric ripped apart. Every service that depends on values held in common is failing. Justice, energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure, environmental protections, social care, state education and health. Now, in 2022, that same assumption, that same lie is peddled again. The Prime Minister and Chancellor lecture us that difficult decisions are necessary to respond to the aftershock of Russia's illegal assault on Ukraine, on the effects of COVID. And we know that they mean Brexit too, even though they don't dare admit it in public. They talk about restoring economic credibility, which was, of course, demolished by the government itself. But no veneer of cliched Conservative fiscal fine words can hide the fact that this budget will be a continuation of a calculated austerity agenda. Even if the Chancellor sticks to current budgets, the result will be real-term cuts driven by inflation and below-inflation public sector pay deals. To put this into context for Wales, the Welsh Government has already estimated that the value of their three-year budget may well be £4 billion less in real terms than expected. Public sector budgets have been cut through the flesh and into the bone. There's nothing left for the Treasury to hack. Indeed, the Institute for Government has warned that in virtually all cases, quick cuts to funding will result in worse services and the need to provide emergency funding at a later date. Because actually, we all know that public services are the only way to provide the safety net that will save each and every one of us when we fall into need. Let's face it, debates over taxation and spending should be at the heart of democracy. But where are those debates? That is why we need a tax reform commission. The Commission would be empowered to consider a broad range of possible reforms, and I'll focus my remarks on a handful today, which I believe merit consideration and which at the very least need to be discussed properly in this House. Let us begin with the question of wealth inequality. In the UK, the financial wealth held by the richest 1% of households is greater than that held by 80% of the population. The Chancellor says everyone will have to make sacrifices, but we must ask the question, why should ordinary people pick up the bill when the wealth of the richest 1% is more than 3.6 million per household? There is no lack of wealth in the UK. What is lacking is a tax system that distributes this equitably. That weasel word, equitably, because we need to know what that means. It's not just an abstract concept. Maybe we'd like to ask what equitable would mean in this context. I would put it to them. Surely, with a heartbreaking 34% of children in Wales living in poverty, our definition of equitable should be driven by the aim of raising enough revenue to be able to deliver policies which ensure that no one in the UK lives below the poverty line. Why would we aspire to anything else? We need to ask why income is treated differently according to its source. That is, why are we treating income from work and income from wealth differently? Why not extend the same national insurance contribution rates that are applied to earnings from employment to income that is received from other forms of activity, other forms of holding investments, say dividends, rent, interest on savings? That could raise an additional £8.6 billion every year. Why not look at reforming national insurance? If contributions were fully equalised for higher earners, academics at Warwick University suggest this could raise £19.7 billion. Oil company BP reported obscene profits of £7 billion in the third quarter. Shell reported its second highest quarterly profit on record, but did not contribute to the UK's windfall tax on energy firms. The Chancellor is reportedly looking to expand the tax, but he should go further and remove the investment allowance which enables many companies to pay no tax if they commit to making investments, regardless of the environmental cost, which simply makes no sense.